Hey everyone, today we're going to be learning how to initialize a Spring Boot application from scratch, how to create some test controllers and some controller, and we're also going to be building up a trivia app. What is a trivia app? Trivia app is essentially going to be something in which you can put in like trivias, like questions and answers, and you can post those question and answers, and they're going to be getting saved in a database, and you should be able to see them. And we're going to be learning how to create models, repositories, and controllers. So that's essentially going to be this entire video. This is going to be the first part of a three-part round trip video. What is a round trip? Round trip is essentially when you're able to see some data on your front end, uh, and you can manipulate the data in some ways, make some changes, communicate those changes on the back end, have those changes registered in your database, and communicated back to your front end so you can see the changes made on the back end. So that, it's like the whole communication process constitutes um, a round trip. And so we're going to be creating a trivia app just to kind of demonstrate how the whole thing works. And if you see a lot of code, don't worry about it. I am going to be sharing the GitHub reference code so that you can see whatever I'm working on, and all the links of all the websites, and any snippet of code that I'm using should also be viewable. So let's get started. The first thing we're going to do to understand how to initialize a Spring Boot app is we're going to be using a Spring Initializer. This is an open source project that some people have been working on, so we're just going to be using this. So let's kind of select something. So Maven is Maven Java 5. We're just going to leave everything to default Java 11. Everything seems good. We're just going to change the name to commerce 309 dot round trip, and and let's call it test demo project for Spring Boot round trip. I think that is sufficient and everything is good. The next thing we're going to be working on is adding dependencies. So the first thing that you need to know about the Spring Boot is that we kind of have to add code for everything we want to work on. So the first thing we need is, how do we create a server from our code? So the first thing we're going to need is actually a Tomcat, which is a Tomcat server which you get with Spring Web. And the next thing we're going to need is some sort of an entity framework, something which can kind of indicate that, oh, this code that we're talking about, it reflects something in the database. So that's something in C# known as the entity framework, and this one's known as the persistence framework. So we're just going to be looking for the persistence, and there's a couple of nice persistence libraries you can work with. We're going to be working with GPA, which is Java Persistence API, and after that we're going to need some sort of a backend to deal with. So for now we're just going to be using H2, which is a temporary 2 MB backend which kind of cleans up, deletes everything you've worked on the second you close the Java, the running executing Java file. So the second you stop running it, it sort of cleans everything up. So there isn't anything saved, but you can now in more advanced versions kind of make permanent changes to your database, connected with your database. But we won't be connecting our database with H2. We'll actually be using, since we're using MySQL for backend, we're going to be using a MySQL driver for that. So we're just going to add that to the dependency too. We're going to generate, and so this is the entire file, and and I'm just going to unzip it, and in the shared document I'm just going to create something called round trip, and in that I'm going to create folders for, since we're going to be working on the front end and the back end, so I'm going to create a folder back end, and I'm just going to put it there. So that's it. Then I'll be using and you can use whatever ID that you want to. I'm going to be using the IDEA, IntelliJ, and because there's this great deal of code predictability from it, but you can use whatever you want. Code predictability is very, very important to me, and it just works nicely with everything. So let's see, round trip, and this is the file I just saved. So I'm just going to open this. It's going to ask you if you can trust it, and you're like, yeah, why not? And yeah, here we go. So while it's loading, one of the things that you'll see is that we don't really have anything, even if we do get it working, to see if it is working. So it's nice to have a test controller. And so I was just going through the documentation for Spring Boot, and they've given this really nice HelloController. So we're just going to be using that to test everything is working. So let's open up POM. So in POM you see that all the dependencies are displayed, and as I said, we don't want to use the MySQL right now. We're just going to be using H2 for demonstration purposes, but we'll later on be plugging in our MySQL database. So for now I'm just going to be selecting it and commenting it out with Ctrl +/ and okay, and let's oh, okay, sometimes it takes a little while for the file directories to load over here, and let's do main Java, and there we go. That's our application. So I'm just going to copy this test controller. I'm going to paste it there just to see if it's working, and I'll just highlight over it, and it's going to import all the libraries needed. We go done, and it can't be public, so I just make a class just to test that it's working, and I'm going to just run test application.main. That seems good. So the first time around, it's actually going to take a little while for it to compile and run. So while it's actually working on it, I'm actually going to start working on something that's going to be interesting for us. So since when we're working with a larger code bank, we kind of need to understand that over time things are going to become more and more complicated. There's going to be thousands of lines of code because we want to do much more complex things than just show hello world or something. And and so the first thing that you should be doing is sort of creating some sort of modularity, and you can obviously figure out on your own how you want to do it, but how I would want to do it in a large project is I want to have a package called model, in which I'm storing all the models. And what are models? Models are just some data type that you use to communicate. For instance, on Facebook you have friends. What is a friend? A friend is somebody who, let's say, has some connection with you, has some ID, has some phone number, has some picture. So that's how the database kind of understands what a friend is, right? So model is just a way for us to understand stuff. Similarly, for the trivia app, the model is simply going to be a question and an answer, and that's it. The next package that we're going to add is repository. Repository is just an interface that I mean, there's going to be different interfaces for every model, but it's just an interface for you to communicate, to have some sort of a communication mechanism with your database. And this is just a plugin. This is literally, you can think of it as a syntactic formality which is needed for Spring Boot. In other languages, they have different ways of implementing this, but it's fairly simple for this one. And in the third package is going to be controllers, and that's where all the action will be happening. That's where all the complexity of Spring Boot is going to come up, and we'll be writing most of the logic. So let's get started. Okay, so the Tomcat has loaded, and let's see if it's working. So we're just going to do localhost, and yep, greetings from Spring Boot, it's working. So in the spirit of modularity, I am going to actually take this whole thing and put this inside the model. Let's call it hello, and there you go. So we've kind of created our first controller. But yeah, let's create. Sorry, this is a controller, so this should actually belongs over there in the controller folder. So just to be, yep, it's in the controller now. So let's get started on our trivia app. So the first thing that we're going to need is a new Java class, which essentially contains the trivia object, defines what trivia objects look like. And by the way, something that I want to talk about is, notice how the annotations are working. So annotations is essentially what the Spring Boot Maven uses to recognize what the function of something is. So to identify this as a controller, we have to write rest controller. The reason why we write rest controller than controller is that the syntax for controller is a little bit complex, so we kind of get rid of the complexity. I mean, just simplify it, just a few lines of code, and we just write rest controller. It's easier. And get mapping essentially just, we want the endpoint to use get rather than, let's say, delete or post or something. So that's just how we recognize that. Okay, let's get started with the trivia. So the first thing that we're going to put is private string question and private string answer. Oh, private, misspelled that, and that should be good. And so there's going to be one big difference, is that you would want to almost always have an ID in your classes, although it's not something that's I think implemented as a rule, but you should have it. I think it improves the efficiency, it helps you coordinate with the database, it helps you identify which field you want to delete or add. Like, it's just really easy to coordinate with the database with an ID. And and as with everything, you kind of have to have annotations to tell the database what this is. So this is actually an entity. We call it a model, but entity is what the persistence library is using to identify this. And the ID has to be identified as ID as well. So tell the persistence library that this is an ID. And also, we don't want to add the ID ourselves. We don't want to be adding and subtracting and figuring out what ID goes where. So we want the value to be kind of generated. Yeah, we want it to be just generated. And how will that happen? Well, we can actually tell it how to generate it. So we can actually define the strategy. For trivia, it's going to be, I think, generation type. Yeah, generation type. I think we can work with auto or identity or sequence. I'm just going to work with identity because we know that ID is identity. And all we have to do next is set up the setters and getters, and so let's do that. Setters and getters, select all. Okay, done. So we have the getters and setters. The next thing we want to do is have some sort of a constructor. Constructor is very important. Just to have a default constructor, which takes nothing, because that's how it knows how to create that object. You're going to end up with really messier if you don't have constructors. And so now we have a model. The next thing we're going to do is create a repository for this model. So tell the database that we have this thing, but we also want to understand how do we talk with the database. We know what classes, like what subfields the database will have from this page that we created, but we still can't really perform any functions for it, and that's what we use the interface for. repository interface. So let's create a repository interface. You'll see what I mean. Trivia repository, and this is an interface, and this extends another interface, which is GPA repository. And we'll have to tell them the type that we're working with, like that's literally what this thing here is for. So it's a trivia, and always do long because it hashes everything to some long field. And input class, yep, that's it. So we've created the trivia repository. That's it. That's all we need. And you'll see that we'll actually be able to get a lot of functionality now out of the trivia database. And next we create the controller. So trivia controller, and let's I feel like I should have let's see. And in the trivia controller, the first thing you'll probably want to do is kind of mark this thing as as a controller. So we use the REST controller for that. And in order to work with the database, as I said, you need some sort of an interface to work with, and that's what the trivia repository was there for. So we're just going to input that. I should actually capitalize all of these things. I should have done that at the beginning and just refactor it. And yeah, camel casing is kind of important with these things, and I'm sorry, I should have done that from the get-go. And repository, okay. Done. And so we're going to actually use that interface that we just created to do some fun stuff. But you have to kind of also tell the database, the Spring Boot framework, that this is the database we want to work with. Okay, and let's create our first controller. So let's do a get mapping, and let's say this one maps to trivia / all. So we want all the trivias getting displayed. So let's call it list trivia get all trivia, and that's it. Doesn't need an argument. List. Yep, okay, we have this, and we just returned the trivia, and you'll see we'll get all the methods that we need to get this. Trivia repository dot find all. That's it. As I said, we now have access to like a lot of methods that come with this interface, and we can use them to coordinate with our database. And let's say we want to post something. Let's do a post mapping, post new trivia. So we can either use the inline arguments to post something, or we can use a body. So let's do both. Trivia / post / Q for question / A for answer. And this is just so you guys kind of understand how this thing works. Trivia, so we should return the trivia that we got for successful, if we've successfully implemented the whole thing. Post trivia by path. So we're passing it, like in the endpoint we're passing the trivia in the path. And let's do this. Let's create another post mapping, but this time we pass it in the body. So we don't need to pass it in the path. We're passing it in the body. And how do we actually pass these things? Well, over here we're going to tell it that we're going to be passing it in the path, and we say string q and path variable string a. That's it. So we've successfully gotten the variables from the path, and in this case we want them from the body, so let's do request body and trivia. So we're going to be creating like a JSON, and it's kind of going to get processed by this library, and it's a new trivia, and we're going to be getting new trivia from the body. And how do we save it in the database? That's fairly simple. We use the interface that we just created. So let's do that. Dot save. And okay, so I guess in this case we actually do need to first create an instance of that trivia. In this one we're just passing the new trivia, so we can just save that and return new trivia. This should be good. In this one we actually have to create it. So let's create a new trivia. New trivia is equals to new trivia and new trivia dot set question q and new trivia dot set answer a, and we save the new trivia and we return the new trivia to see that everything has worked out as we thought it would. Okay, so that's it. We've just kind of okay, so now we have all three functions. Let's rerun the application, stop and rerun. And one of the first things that you'll notice in terms of limitations of this app is that we can only see the trivias in our browser. We can't actually post them. So that's one of the reasons why I'll actually be using Postman for this, because there is no way of posting new trivia. So let's set up the Postman for creating new trivia. So let's let's see. So when we run it, we see that there is no trivia. Could not send request. Oh, it's not running. Okay, and it's trivia slash post slash new question 1 slash new. So I'm putting in the new trivia in the path. So let's see if this endpoint works, and let's test out another endpoint. Oh, and this is post. And let's test out another endpoint in which we pass it as a body, and you'll see how that works too. So in the body we say raw, and instead of text we say JSON, and we should pass an ID too if you want, but we can leave it empty because it's the Spring Boot knows that that's identity, so we don't have to enter it over here. And we say question new question 2 comma answer new answer 2. Okay, so we've just created a new trivia body. So let's see if there's any trivia. Error not found. Let me see if we did anything wrong. Oh, trivia all. Okay, so to get all the trivias we have to use the exact endpoint. There we go, there is no trivia over here. And let's try to post a new trivia from the path. Let's do this. There we go, and let's see if that got posted. So we can see that, and let's post another trivia from the body. Send trivia not trivia not found question answer. Oh, slash post. Okay, should have gotten the endpoint right. Previous slash post. Okay, let's try this again. Oh, it just posted it. And let's post the third one just to see that it's functioning consistently. Okay, it's posted again. And let's check all the trivias, trivia all. And yes, all the trivias have been posted. As you can see, ID is kind of consistently increasing. And that's it for this video. In the next one, we're going to be learning how to convert this temporary database, this H2 database, into something more permanent connected with our MySQL library. Thank you.